So, what's going on? Any problems you're encountering? You might be worried about an examination. We're not near that yet. I would say we're at least 3 weeks away from that, so I wouldn't worry too much at the moment. I'll give you plenty of warning about that. What I want to do is just keep on with Mendelssohn. If you have any questions that you might want to pose before that, I will take them. But I could just, one thing from the preface here, I'm quite pleased about. I've told you about these things. Maybe I should, one thing, it's a big fat book, there's no doubt of that. You know, I put a dedication page in there like that. And dedication page, the first quote on the dedication page is from the Talmud. And it says, it is related that the children of Zadok the priest, one a boy and the other a girl, were taken captive to Rome, each falling to the lot of a different officer. One doesn't usually hear these stories. One officer, I don't even think most Jewish people talk about these stories. One officer resorted to a prostitute and gave her the boy. The other went into the store of a shopkeeper and gave him the girl in exchange for some wine. This to fulfill Joel 4:3, and they have given a boy for a harlot and sold a girl for wine. So very similar to what the New Testament does, taking scriptural quotes and out of context and applying it to present day events 2,000 years ago. After a while, the prostitute brought the boy to the shopkeeper and said to him, since I have a boy who is suitable for the girl you have, will you agree they should cohabit, and whatever issues be divided between us? He accepted the offer. They immediately took them and placed them in a room. The girl began to weep, and the boy asked her why she was crying. She answered, should I not weep when the daughter of a high priest is given in marriage to one like you, a slave? He inquired of whose daughter she was, and she replied, I am the daughter of Zadok the high priest. He then asked her where she used to live, and she answered, in the upper marketplace. He next inquired, what was the sign above the house? And she told him. He said, have you a brother or a sister? She answered, I had a brother, and there was a mole on his shoulder, and whenever he came home from school, I used to uncover it and kiss it. He asked, if you were to see it now, would you know it? She answered, I would. He bared his shoulder, and they recognized each other. They then embraced and kissed till they expired. Then the Holy Spirit cried out, for these things I weep. That's in Lamentations, Rabbah, which is a commentary on Lamentations from that period, and another chapter of the Talmud. Okay. I refer to it in my preface, and so I'll read you what I said about that in my preface if you're interested. First of all, I talk about how the Dead Sea Scrolls changed everything. So I'll read you the last couple of pages if you've got patience. You have a minute? Yeah. I know, perhaps, it's, let's see. I talk about some other subjects, and I say this is not what we're really interested in this book. And what's going to be the subject of this book except peripherally. In this book, what we're interested in is Messianism within the borders of Palestine. Whereas the Romans called it the land of Judah, the wilderness of Judea, as the scrolls sometimes archaically refer to it. Or to a certain degree, we shall encounter in the terminology the land of Damascus in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It is these documents that came to light or materialized and changed everything. The even more miraculous discovery, because I referred to the Gospel of Judas, that recently appeared earlier in this preface, the even more miraculous discovery than the Gospel of Judas, miraculous as it was, of the Dead Sea Scroll 19 centuries after they had seemingly been secreted away in caves, has come back to haunt us all like some unexpected time capsule out of the past. I told you these things. Obviously, the people who wrote them then, and then deposited them or secreted them away, did not therefore die in vain. It is these documents that have happened to change everything, finally giving us the tools to penetrate the darkness of how all these peculiar literary creations we now know came into being, and how the history of the, quote, Messianic movement in Palestine, as it would perhaps best be to call it, was transmuted into something entirely different, wholly alien and Greek, or perhaps more accurately, Egypto-Greco-Roman, if one likes, as just suggested, even to some extent Herodian. But in any event, the very opposite of what was happening in Palestine, Judea, in these pivotally foundational times where the history of man and womankind is concerned. This is what, if someone with a more religious bent of mind were to describe it, is miraculous about their being found. And this, almost exactly at the moment when the new Jewish state was in the process, it would appear, of being born. This is what gives us an entirely new perspective on these events, which those who came before us did not have, and therefore could not use in, for example, something like their quest for the historical Jesus. They did not have the control the scrolls provide, and had little or nothing to compare things with, for they did not know, except for the often hostile bits sometimes afforded them in rabbinic literature or Josephus, what a native messianic movement might actually look like. A movement most people now content themselves by calling Essene, but now we do, and this makes all the difference. This is why our scholarship today is so different, and this is why we can now do research that our forebears and predecessors, even the most perceptive and incisive among them, could not do. That's why I'm saying that people say, why didn't you say, people say these things last century? They didn't have the documents to make these assessments. Being often obliged to rely on what were actually mythologized, retrospective, even fantasizing presentation, bordering sometimes even on dissimulation or disinformation. Now what we actually have before us here in the scrolls is the literature of the Messianic movement in Palestine, homogeneous, pointed, unadulterated, and uncompromising. Call it by whatever name you might wish. Actually what it really is the literature of extreme Nazaritism. Therefore, probably the somewhat bowdlerized New Testament nomenclature, Nazarene, or even revolutionary or messianic Sadduceeism. This is what I've been trying to point out in my several works over the last 20 years. It is for these reasons, too, that I felt obliged to try to break the academic and scholarly monopoly and the literal stranglehold over the publication and interpretation of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the two were in fact interrelated, that previously obtained from approximately 1952 to 1991. In fact, ever since the international team, as it was called, took over responsibility for their publication. Or, as I expressed it elsewhere, to try to let, quote, 1,000 voices sing. The only way to do this was to allow any interested person to approach all the documents that existed in a totally free manner, independent of mind-numbing academic analyses. And I put this proposition forth in the introduction I did with Professor James Robinson of the University of Claremont to the facsimile edition of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Having said this, it is the Dead Sea Scrolls that have, as if by some miracle, changed everything. They have given us the native Palestinian documents that did not go through and were left, as it were, untouched by the editorial processes of the Roman Empire. Either the reason or the result, obviously, of their having been put in caves in the first place. Again, an ancient time capsule, Palestinian messianism, before it went overseas and became Hellenized. From the perspective of the present writer, an additional contradiction in terms. That is, that you should have a Hellenized messianism is a contradiction in terms. You can't have it. A messianism is not Hellenistic. It is for this reason that these documents differ so much from the ones found, for example, at Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt, or for that matter, the Romanized Gospels as they have both been chosen for us and come down to us. Anyway, I go on in that vein and talk about, well, I might as well finish this up if I can. Here in the scrolls was real Palestinian messianism, as raw as it may seem, and at the same time real Palestinian revolutionary apocalypticism. It is these documents that give us the yardstick, as just alluded to, along with a perspicacious reading of Josephus and a few other sources, to measure the others, and as the Pseudo-Clementine homilies quote Jesus as putting it, to determine false coin from true. This I have tried to do in my work up until now, and for this too I consider this generation to be a fortunate one, even a blessed one. And I go on about how I did this in James and so on and so forth. In James, I started the process of deciphering the modus operandi of the more literary romantic portions of the Gospels and the book of Acts. This is to put things as kindly and diplomatically as possible. Literary romantic is to put it kindly. One thing Paul was not, and here I get down to what I wanted to get to, but I needed to do the background for you, was a literary romantic. A hater, not a lover. A polemicizer, not a conciliator or accommodator, and certainly not an artist. I'm being very tough here. But he was a rhetorical dialectician, or as some might prefer perhaps to term it, a gymnast and an allegorizer of the first order, though with hardly an ounce of human sympathy for those who might have opposed him, or whom he thought stood in his way in some manner. Therefore I say, definitely not a literary romantic, and like the Gospels and the book of Acts, hardly an historian at all. However this may be, this is the sequel I promised at that time. Though it took years longer than I projected, I think I've gone about as far in the direction, that's why I'm not going to write much anymore, of such decipherment as one might. I do think that to some degree I've cracked the codes, quote, of some of the, quote, theological disinformation, as one of my more appreciative readers put it, involved in these documents. And I do think, as he also expressed it, that we are, quote, looking out at a hitherto unseen landscape of almost unimaginable beauty and splendor. This position was echoed by another reviewer, whom I seem to have struck, to use his also not unflattering words, though some may think otherwise, as someone who has been shown a revelation of stunning splendor, unquote. I hope he's correct in this evaluation. Moreover, I hope my earlier and present readers will find this to be true, and that some of this, quote, landscape is either imparted to or shared with them. This is the most any author can legitimately hope for or has a right to expect from his work. Moreover, if Jesus were alive today, this is for Christian readers particularly, existent or non-existent in the form he has been presented to us, and if there had been things that have been done and said in his name that were not his, it is my view that he would expect, nay require, his most sincere, ardent, and dedicated supporters and followers to find this out, there being nothing worse than having things done in or attributed to one's name in either life or legacy that were not one's own. This would be his charge to them and their obligation. In my case, and this is what I'm now getting to, this other point I was trying to make about the dedication, however, I have to admit having an additional hope in mind. The reader will forgive that if there is any hubris, and this is why I tell you I'm going to change my focus from now on. Here, hubris means, Greek for pride. To at least have done my small part in helping to open people's minds, and in certainly contributing to making sure no future holocausts of the type we all just witnessed in the last century, this is why it's a contemporary statement for this class, and have been witnessing over these last 19 and a half centuries, ever transpire again. I hope that for that alone we have put the, quote, evil demon, as the Gospels sometimes refer to it, to rest, have done with all slogans of real disinformation, and finally come to grips with how amazing the times pictured in the Dead Sea Scrolls really were, and how incomparably brave and precious all these real first century martyrs, quote, were. And we're not speaking here of those perhaps retrospectively incorporated into the first century, that is, put back into the first century. Quote, martyrs of a more Hellenized or spiritualized kind came later, but not perhaps in the first century Palestine, and not among those who were taken to Rome to build Vespasian's Colosseum, on the whole constructed with the proceeds plundered from the Jerusalem temple. Titus admits as much in 79 CE in the items he depicts on the triumphal arch that still stands in his name in the ruins of the Roman Forum today. Many too, that is, many of those taken to Rome to help with the treasure that he stole, many to subsequently die in it, and like the death camp now memorialized like some vast temple of either doom or demonic destruction at Auschwitz. I've been to Auschwitz, I've seen it. It's like a vast temple of death. Of either demonic doom or destruction at Auschwitz, the most macabre of historical reversals and ironies. How pathetic and yet how tragic. That's why I don't have any apologies to make for the things I say in this, or I might say in this book. In my dedication page, here I get to the point, I've tried to impart some of these feelings to the reader. What the Holy Spirit really did in those terrible days was weep, as it would have done as well in our own two tragic times. That relates to the quote that I read you. Their counterpart, it wept, as the Talmud puts it in the story. I exerted about the two children of the high priest Zadok taken as captive to Rome, and in the wake of the first Jewish revolt. We will cite it again in the end of chapter 11, the dogs who licked poor Lazarus' sores. Actually, it probably didn't even do that. But if there were one, if we were going to get into the realm of artistic expression, it should have, that is, wept. But what it most certainly did not do was cry out the familiar synoptic gospel, this is my only begotten son, in him I am well pleased. Or even the apocryphal gospel of the Hebrews, quoting Psalm 2:7, is reported by Jerome and echoed in Hebrews 1:5, who have rephrased it. Before people of his mindset made sure it too, like the gospel attributed to Judas, disappeared. At this moment I have begotten him. That's what Jerome says the Holy Spirit said when at the baptism. Except in the mind of latter-day Greco-Roman artificers, or their retrospective man-God, God-man, rewrite, overwrite specialists. That is, their philosophical or theological aboriginal scripture writers. Anyway, that's basically what I had to say there. That's pretty tough, pretty tough. And what I mean by that is I think the Holy Spirit wept. Not really. I don't think the Holy Spirit did anything, honestly. But if you're going to portray Holy Spirit as doing anything, I think that picture of those two children taken to Rome as captives expresses what the Holy Spirit did. and the rest is Greco-Roman, something different, literary enlargement, shall we say, on the script. Anyway, you know what I think about that, but that's the preface. I'm sorry to have read that, but you asked me what I wanted to do. That's what I want to do, that kind of stuff. And that is try to make it clear that, you know, the things we've watched in our time have to do not with good, well-meaning people who really care, but with people who've been infected with this poisonous bacillus that has come down through the ages and is now, you know, inhabiting Islamic extremism and other Australian extremism and things like that. You know, that they have unwittingly imbibed from the documents that they hold precious and don't realize that they have these defects, the defects of the people who originally had this agenda in mind. So that's why, to me, this course is really quite important. Okay, guys, sorry for that, but it was on my mind, and I thought you might like that. Apologize for bothering you with it. Back to our Mendelssohn. So, we were talking about the first chapter here. I think basically we said he was worried about excommunication, right? And that's what he ended up with. There's some other arguments. Let's look at the second chapter. We have somewhat different pages. So he starts to talk about Vendôme's essay that I read you. Let's see. We went up to the circumciser and so on, who enjoys his income and rank, not because he infirms or endorses a special doctrinal position, but because he performed an operation. And he concludes, as long as he does his job, cuts, it's a very crude example, obviously, cuts the foreskin, doesn't matter if he believes or not, you know, he should be paid and so on. But really that wasn't the question I think Vendôme was asking. So he's taking liberties with that question. In any event, finally, he concludes, as a result of that argument, and of course it isn't final because we're going to go a lot further here. I don't know if you have the same numbering as I have. According, there's about 3 paragraphs further along from that circumcision stuff. What page would that be in yours? We did the circumcision stuff last time. The circumciser. You find it? Anyway, you'll find it. According to the laws of reason, can rights to person and things be linked to a person's assent to specific doctrines? Or can they be acquired by agreement with them? That's a very important question. Can contracts and agreements produce perfect rights as well as compulsory duties unless imperfect rights and duties of conscience have previously existed without any contract? This is really abstract stuff. What he's talking about is social contract again. In other words, you know, with the laws of reason as your guide, and he assumes that he can decide what the laws of reason are. I don't know if he can or not. Is a person's rights linked to agreeing to certain doctrines that the majority society or the majority religion or even the Jewish ghetto situation, the authorities in there, can the circumciser's rights be linked to his assent to certain doctrines? Again, he's always worried about the same thing. We're having the same thing today, aren't we? We're trying to decide, do the people in the prisons who are terrorists have certain rights? You know, of the American Constitution, and it's a tough question. Mostly, the people who have rights to the American Constitution are citizens of the country. But is there such a thing as human rights? That's what people are asking. Can you just keep people in jail indefinitely and so on? If they're going to come back and cut your throat afterwards, it's a very serious question. I mean, no one, it's so weird because no one in World War II asked that question, as people have pointed out. I mean, there were about over 500,000 German prisoners sitting there, and they could have languished there for 5 or 10 years. Nobody was worried about their rights, and the same thing, with all due respect to any Japanese background people in the room, with Japanese prisoners of war. Whoever was concerned about how long you could keep them without habeas corpus. Nobody worried about such a thing. But our modern world is so full of press and communications that the least thing you do wrong is immediately broadcast all over the world. You know, it's instant media coverage of everything. So I don't know. I don't have the answer. I'm just saying that that's the same question in effect. I'll stop a moment. Does any of you have any answers to this question that you want to share with us? Anybody feel they want to say something? Yeah.
I don't think it's the least thing that we've done wrong. I mean, if they were shooting these guys with a certain amount of human dignity, then there would probably be a lot less of a clamor.
Well, wait a second. Hold on. We weren't speaking of what we in America have done wrong or right, or the least or the most. I just want to know is, do people, you feel in these arguments that Mendelssohn is making here about, you know, do they have some kind of rights, is what the question is. And you say yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So the government is saying, okay, and McCain and those people, they have Geneva Convention rights. Do they have rights beyond that? In other words, not to be tortured mercilessly or things of that kind. Do they have rights? No one's beheading them as far as I know, and nobody wants to starve them to death as far as I know, although they may be secretly, I have no idea. Water torture was something that they spoke about. I shouldn't laugh at these things. But do they have some other kind of a right? Yeah, I don't have the answer. In World War II, no one would have even thought about it. That's all I'm saying. It never would have entered anyone's mind, yeah.
I think that when it comes to the question of whether the Constitution applies to is it just citizens or just people in general, I think there was something about how the rights that are listed, like the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, they aren't giving people those rights, but it was rather an affirmation that they existed.
Well, name me one or two of the Bill of Rights so that we can focus on what you're talking about.
Okay, freedom of speech, freedom of religion.
Well,
how about trial by jury?
Trial by jury.
Okay, so look here. No one thinks prisoners of war in a battlefield situation has trial by jury, because if you did, you would have an endless procedure of legal issues arising that would just tie up the courts forever. Military tribunals, they're going to give these people, obviously. So, you know, people don't want them to have military tribunals. But it's a very difficult issue, but I see what you're saying. The question is, I don't think anyone in America, either party, thinks the rights of the American Constitution apply to the prisoners of war who have intent to destroy this country. Now, the only question is whether these people are all in there legitimately, and do they all have this mindset of wanting to destroy the country?
15-year-old kids, some of them.
Well, I mean, let's not go overboard in our pity. I mean, they're not going to pity you in a similar situation, I assure you. That doesn't mean you shouldn't pity them, but let's not pull on our heartstrings here about that. The question is, are they legitimately involved in a war situation that wants to do harm to? I mean, the last I heard, Bin Laden had a fatwa from the Saudi Mufti that said that you can kill, what did I say? I think it was last week I told you, it was clear in my mind. You can kill up to, was it 5 million, 10 million, or 20 million Americans? You can kill, because that's how many Muslims they've killed, which is a figment of his imagination, that the Americans have killed 20 million Muslims or something like that. It's preposterous. But in other words, these people literally think that they can kill, I think, 10 or 20 million Americans in cold blood without any compunction whatsoever. And you want, in your way, say, oh, there's a 15-year-old boy there who may not belong there. Well, I think that's for the military authorities to sort that out. If there are any kind of reasonable people, they should be able by this time to know who belongs to them.
I think reasonable is the part that needs to be focused
Well,
on.
the military people are our brothers and sisters. If they're not reasonable, then we've got a real problem in this country. I think the military often represents the best of this country from what I can see. I'd rather trust some of, not all the people in the military than half the policemen I meet down in Orange County, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, you haven't met too many grunts, it doesn't sound like.
Huh?
You haven't met too many grunts, it doesn't sound like.
Oh, I think the American Army, from what I hear about, is much better than it was 50 years ago in terms of behavior and treatment. I wouldn't have wanted to go in the American Army 50 years ago because there would have been a lot of, like, if you've seen From Here to Eternity. You didn't see, how many have seen From Here to Eternity? We're in another world. That's the story of the Marine barracks out in Honolulu before the raid on Pearl Harbor and the hazing and horrible situations that people got into in the U.S. Army. So yeah, you've met some grunts that are pretty bad. Okay, I'll take your word for it. I haven't met grunts. All I know is it's a better army than it was 50 years ago, from what people tell me and other people that have reported to me. My daughter was telling me about a Jamaican woman that she has dealings with in New York City because she gives care to my 100-year-old mother that my daughter helps take care of and arrange. And she was, this person had terrible problems with her children and in Brooklyn, and drug problems and other problems, and several have already been in prison and so on. She was terribly worried, very sweet woman, very religious woman, and about this one son that was kind of basically going to some boot sort of situation. I forget what it was, Job Corps, and he just hated it, didn't like it, and suddenly up and enlisted in the Army, and she was just astonished. And he went out and to some place out in Kansas or Oklahoma or someplace like that, and he loves the Army. He loves the Army. He comes back and he raves about the Army to her. Had so many friends. He just absolutely loves it. He's Afro-American, on the edge of prison situation, so, and he loves her. And she just can't believe the kid never even made his bed before, she told my daughter. You know, couldn't even pick up his clothes in his room, and now he's like totally, you know, whatever you call it.
He finally found inspiration.
Her daughter, who was already pregnant as a teenager and had a child, and she was taken care of. Now she wants to enlist in the Army. So you know, you can hear some kind of stories, maybe from Anglo grunts, but I'm hearing stories from minority grunts that find the Army to be a place of opportunity and equality.
My father and brother both served. I don't have too much against the Army, but if we're going to lead the world, and that's what we're talking about, leading the world, and we're not going to lead them into a universal human rights and civil rights ethic.
Well, we're not going to lead the world.
Well, that's what we're talking. That's the
No, you're too late. You're too late. We could have led the world in 1945 when we had all the power and nobody else had the power. But we have no way to lead the world now, since Europe wants to displace us in terms of power and leadership. The Russians hate us.
Sure.
The Chinese want to exert their influence in Latin America and in the Middle East and get control of the oil. We're lucky just to tread water. So basically, what we're trying to do is stop people from destroying our cities. We're not trying to lead anybody. We just want to say, you're not, I mean, Bush, like him or not, has an obligation to stop you from being destroyed by a nuclear bomb here in Long Beach Harbor. And you're not going to stop that by kissing someone on the cheek, I can assure you. They're just, the people that want to do that are not interested in your kisses. They are, and that's what I think is not appreciated by good people like yourself. Yes, I agree with you. In an ideal situation, if these people didn't have the weaponry that we're speaking about, or term warfare, or other things, and we were back in the 50s, where we were dealing with colonial situations, I think that all what you're saying would be wonderful. I'm ready to go. Let's treat everyone fairly and give everyone a fair break. But the point is that you miss once, and an American city goes up. You miss it once. You don't get you don't get the right intelligence, you can't follow the train of this thing, the money trail. These people are loaded with money. They got oil in Venezuela, in Iran, and all these other places, and so on, of all these countries that hate the United States. You're not going to make them love us, and they all want to get us. They don't want to get France.
Why do they hate us?
Envy, power. They hate anything that's more powerful. They don't hate us because we've done them really any harm. We haven't done. What harm have we really done them? Have we lined them all up against the wall and shot them all? Who's taking the casualties in Baghdad? We are. 17 Americans were killed yesterday. Are we taking those people up and shooting 17 people, or like the Germans did, shooting 500 people in, where are you coming from? I mean, people hate. Why do the Cubans hate the Americans? What have we done to Cubans? All right, we've been tough, but we haven't mowed them all down and killed them all. We haven't put them in gas chambers. We could have destroyed, obliterated the whole place. We had the power, and we still do, to obliterate everything. So where's the hatred? If they had the power we had, do you think they would hesitate to obliterate us? That's the thing I'm asking, and that you, I think, don't seem to wrestle. You're good, decent, but you don't realize the danger that we're facing. And I say, oh, that's the Bush people. No, it isn't Bush, man. I don't think Bush is doing a tough enough job. I think the danger is so big out there, and I'm not crazy, I don't think, because I've lived through a lot of things. I think the danger is so big out there that he's not even doing what American power should do. Honestly, so we have a disconnect.
Well, I think it reminds me of the story that I was reading about Mendelssohn and the Enlightenment, where this guy who digs Mendelssohn quite a bit tells this story about he models. I think he writes a play or something, and he models Nathan the Wise after Mendelssohn.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And the guy that gives out the 3 rings and says, there's I have a magic ring that'll make everybody love you. And he makes copies of it, gives it out to his 3 kids when he dies, right? And then they're all fighting over which one has the real ring. And they sit before the judge, and the judge, realizing what the father was up to, said it doesn't really matter which one of you has the real ring. It's which one of you acts like you have the real ring. And if you act like you have the real ring, then you actually do.
Yeah, but these people, we did act that way after World War II. We did. I mean, you underestimate this country. This country, from 1945 to, I think, maybe they got pulled into the Vietnam War in a questionable manner, but this country really acted with tremendous restraint. MacArthur wanted to nuke China. This country allowed Russia to nuclearize. All they would have had to say was give an ultimatum. You stop your atom bomb program or you're gone. They would have done that to us. This country allowed all these problems to fester out of, I think, a certain decency, not wanting to hurt other people unnecessarily. And frankly, the decency, I think that, for instance, take bin Laden. This country helped bin Laden and everyone do what they were doing in Afghanistan. Maybe it was political, sure, but the point was they armed them, they supported them, they helped them deal with the Russian incursion into Afghanistan and so on and so forth. And what's the thanks they get? Now, these same people want to turn and nuke the United States. I mean, we built them and made them powerful, and now they hate us. So I don't think you can do anything to make them love you. I don't think you can do anything anywhere to make them love you. Yeah.
I think if you study the actual suicide terrorists, they have been treated with love.
I think so too.
They're middle class. They had visas to the United States. They went to our schools. These are not people that had all the background that we blame on terrorists. They're not starving people.
No,
They're not
sure.
uneducated.
No,
They
but
haven't been
rich men.
midnight. These are people we gave love to, and
We gave love to them?
Yes, I think so. He's right. I mean, we let them come here. We gave them visas with students and so on and so forth.
Educated
We
them.
treated them as equals in our society. And what did they do? They went and blew up tried to blow the World Trade Center up once, and no one got the message here. And you saw those people coming out the first time, coughing, with, fire, everything. And so 10 more years, they let it fester, and then they did this. You don't think they're just sitting there waiting, like doing nothing. while we're doing this.
Maybe you can explain to me why because, like you said, we have a disconnect. But
Yeah, we have total
What I'd
disconnect.
like to hear is, why is
But
this
you're
rhetoric-
in a majority of the intellectuals. I will tell you that. I'm a big minority, so
Well,
don't feel bad.
So no, I don't actually.
No,
But
you
what I
shouldn't.
do
You're
want
in
to
good
know
company.
is, what I want to hear is what I want to hear what you're saying. Why? At least I want to hear your opinion on why the rhetoric of hatred for America is so easily.
I heard the rhetoric for hatred of America in Europe when I was knocking around as a beatnik hippie back in the 50s and 60s.
Right,
It was
what I
never
wanna-
any different.
What I want to know is why is it
During the
so-
Vietnam War, it was even worse than now. I mean, it was bad after World War II. Anti-Americanism is like a badge for weaker countries. And in South America, there's always been anti-American.
Is that the entirety of your?
No, but what do you mean? I mean, the point is, what have we done to deserve it, I would like to know.
Why does it find validation? Is what I'd like to know.
Why are the Canadians anti-American? I mean, you know,
I don't see them
what have
lining
we
up to
done?
kill us.
What have we done to these countries to deserve?
Well, we're a little obstinate. We're a little arrogant. We're a little disrespectful to say
It's
the
absolutely
least.
untrue. It's absolutely untrue. We are the most unarrogant country. We are the most undisrespectful country. We, in all of other countries, in all of British, and all of French, we think their cultures are wonderful. We love Italian culture. I mean, what are you talking about? We're disrespectful.
You'd answer the question that I actually asked, which was, I'm not really concerned with why Europe hates us. I kind of get that. I get that. I'm kind of curious about why Iran and Iraq, right? Why these Middle Eastern countries, why is this rhetoric of hatred towards us so
Because
easily
we've supported
purchased?
Israel, that's all.
So
If we
easily
had stomped on Israel, they would be kissing our feet.
Okay, but how does this translate and trickle down, let's use Reagan's term, all the way down to the guys, the grunts on their side? Why do
And I think we supported Israel out of fairness because of an
Sure,
oppressed
whatever.
people. Oh, yeah, but you're just brushing that aside. The
Well,
hatred.
because that's not my question.
Yeah, but you're saying these people have a right to hate us. They have no right to hate us
I didn't say
whatsoever.
that actually. My question was, why is it so easily purchased in these cultures? This anti-American
Oh,
sentiment?
because the masses are downtrodden in these countries.
Okay.
And it's very easy. How did Hitler convince millions and millions of people to go and sacrifice themselves out in the steppes of Central Asia and Russia and fight to the last man for what? For what? Because after World War I, conditions were terrible and the country had fallen apart, and he was able to focus their hatred elsewhere. And that's what these people are doing.
That seems to make sense.
Yeah, what
to
was
me.
your point?
Well, doesn't it have to do with like in the first century, like how Hellenization was taken over? Now they're worried that Americanization is taking over, and they don't really like that.
I think that they're not worried, I have to be honest, you're younger. I think people were worried about that after World War II. And I think there's less worry about Americanization now. In fact, Americanization did take over. You go look at the clothing styles in Europe. Everyone wears jeans.
Globalization.
Look at but we didn't do it on purpose. We just had a culture that people enjoyed. I don't think they admired us because they thought when they saw us, we were unintellectual, not very sophisticated, and they had contempt for us culturally. But they loved Hollywood movies. They even loved McDonald's hamburgers, even though they won't admit it, because there was no fast food places. You could never take a child anywhere in Europe out to eat anywhere on a trip. You know, they didn't even know what a motel was. You know, all these things that they have taken. So that's already occurred. Now, there's a power struggle in the world where America is not, it looks militarily like the superpower, but there are all these other countries that are attaining equal status in terms of at least wealth, weaponry, and things like that. So I don't think that the American hegemony is, and we don't have a big army in it. I mean, if you wanted to really fight a war, you'd have to bring in the draft. And we haven't instituted a draft here. That's what's so awful about the situation, not that we should. That poor guys in the reserves and everything else are being called upon to do a job which is far beyond their means. So if they're bitter and everything, I'm not surprised. Anyway, we're not going to solve this problem, but the main thing comes back to what he's saying and what you're saying and what you guys are saying over here. Do the rights. That's the argument at the present day. And some of you guys say, yes, we have to treat them more decently. And the question is Guantanamo decent or not? Yeah.
I think Egypt is a good example. We feed the poor of Egypt. We give them around $2.5 billion worth of wheat and food. Without that, they would be rioting in the street within 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And we could double that and triple it, and the Egyptians will still hate us.
I don't think the Egyptians do hate us that much, probably, but the Islamic fundamentalists among them do.
Well, who do you think the majority are in Egypt? If there were a
Didn't
vote,
used to
win
be.
tomorrow.
It didn't used to be when the colonial era was there. Before all this incitement occurred through television and other means, and now, you know, I think that if I can be so bold, forgive me. People like Hitler and Mussolini came into being because of the microphone. I mean, without a microphone, Hitler would have been nobody. He couldn't have talked to a huge crowd and had his voice, surround sound and so on.
Gandhi too.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And radio and stuff like that. I mean, 50 years before that, he would have been nobody. So now we have a new thing, the internet, and we haven't realized the potential of the internet and you know, all of those kind of things. So I think this incitement is occurring like Al Jazeera and places like that, where they have global television feeds into the Islamic country, and the internet and the global television feeds are being manipulated very cleverly by the extremist Muslim organizations. So now you think that the mass is anti-American. Before, in the colonial era, most countries, what they wanted to be in India or even Egypt was little Englishmen. They wanted to go to Oxford. They wanted to have, you know, a tie. They wanted to look like a British gentleman, you know, and so on and so forth. The same with the French colonies. And so everybody, you know, that was 100 years ago. So we don't realize how quickly these things are changed by the mechanical means. That's my point. So you say, how come they hate us, or in Egypt do they hate us? Oh, 50
I
years.
say, how come? I know why.
Yeah,
But
50
they
years
hate us.
ago in Egypt, you know, they didn't hate
Fair
you.
vote tomorrow, it would be the Muslim Brotherhood would take over the country. A fair vote.
Yeah, it's true. Probably true. Probably true. And then there wouldn't be a democracy left.
No.
So that gets back to your
You have it
thing.
wrong.
You see, these people, now I know this sounds reactionary and, you know, totally unfair. These people want to use the Western system against itself. They're using the Western dependence of oil against itself, and they're using the Western Bill of Rights against itself. They demand all these rights in France and all these other countries. They all come in and immigrate, etc. And they want to use the election system against itself, like Hitler did. The moment they get power through the election system, which is why I'm not sure you can export democracy, as I've said before, to a lot of these countries, like you're saying, is that the moment they come into power, Saddam probably was elected at some point. Chavez in Venezuela is elected. Then he can make America into the evil demon, and he can stay in power forever. Castro was probably elected 50 years ago. Makes America into the evil demon, he can stay in power forever. So that they abolished democracy. So when Bush is trying to say we want to export democracy, that's a noble thought. And I think a bastion of democracy in the Middle East, like Iraq, would have been a grand experiment. But unfortunately, he didn't go in with the power necessary to do it. If he was going to do it, he had to go in with the power necessary to keep public order while the institutions had a chance to grow. The opposition party doesn't want to give him that time, and he doesn't want to put the power in there that is required, so the whole thing is a mess. Anyway, so it would be noble if you could get a democracy. So what you're saying is that they will abolish the rights that you give them. So what is your answer? You take these people out Guantanamo. He says, I've been here for 5 years. You know, you have no right to hold me anymore. Okay, fine, leave. The next thing you know, maybe not every one of them, but probably 60–70% of them will be planning how they can come in here for another suicide bombing. So what is the answer? You can't judge what a person's going to do 10 or 15 years from now.
No,
What
but I think
answer?
that
They were caught on the battlefield, theoretically. Maybe they weren't. Maybe we rounded them up in peaceful homes in Pakistan. I don't know. They were supposedly caught on the battlefield. I have to take the military's word for that. Maybe I'm wrong. What would you do with them?
well, I think the first thing that I would say is if we had a lot more international support, this kind of task would be a lot easier, but.
There won't be international support because these people want to see America go down the tubes.
Because.
France wants America
Right,
hegemony
and
ended.
I mean, is it because there are a bunch of heathens over there, or because they
No,
think we
it's
are?
France. It's nothing. France has always been politically manipulative from the Revolutionary War period till now.
All right.
First, they fought a war against England for control of the American colonies. Encouraged the American Indians to fight against the British and bring in scalps and all that kind of stuff.
You know, I mean-
But let me finish. Then they lost. Now wait, hold on. Then they started manipulating the American side and supported us, and so on and so forth and so on and so
You don't think we
forth.
did that?
They've always been manipulative. They don't do it because they believe in anything.
You don't think we did stuff like that? I mean, expansionism and war is war. And my answer to you, if I can finish, is we would have a hell of a lot more support internationally if we did a hell of a lot more of what John's talking about, which is humanitarian aid. If we had a Department of Peace as well as a Department of War. If we showed ourselves to be the noble, enlightened, probably best country on the planet in
We
theory.
did show ourselves that.
Not in my opinion, and maybe, maybe we're coming at it from different perspectives since we're
Well,
different ages.
I don't
but
think,
in my
I don't want to ask how old you are,
I'm
because that's not
33.
fair. But the point is that you weren't living through the period where America was as
Right.
noble as one could be.
Right, but
I-
you're not living in the period where you're looking at widespread dystopianism and widespread alienation of our own culture.
I think that,
we grew up in this reality.
Look, under Reagan and Clinton, everyone had a really positive feeling about things. People thought things were really going forward fairly well. Now, one was a Republican,
That
one
was
was a
the
Democrat.
story.
That was, and America was being the noble light upon the hill, supposedly, all
That's
this
not really.
kind of rubbish. Okay, but,
That's the story that everybody bought, but
All right,
Kosovo
well,
happened,
wait,
we
just
let
hold on.
Rwanda
So,
happen.
when the World Trade Center happened, suddenly we're the evil demons. How can that be? How can it change overnight? That we could be all nice guys up until 9/11 and suddenly, you have to see there's something wrong with the logic that you're saying.
Well, I
We
don't
didn't
think it
suddenly
happened.
become evil after 9/11.
I don't think it happened until after we left Afghanistan, and when we decided to go into Iraq on absolutely no probable cause.
Well, forget that, what you think no probable cause. They went into Iraq, wait a minute, you don't need a cause.
I know you want to forget
No,
it.
no,
but the
no,
rest of us
no, it's
And
nonsense.
if you want to sell it to us, you got to
No, I don't
sell
want
it
to sell it to
that
you.
way.
It's nonsense what you're saying because
You got to sell us war
they
in a way that
fought,
looks like we
wait,
are
hold on a
noble.
minute, man. They fought a war in the 1990s
For
in
what?
Iraq. Hold on, whether good or bad, I don't care. And they signed a peace treaty supposedly, a truce that was supposed to be observed. Not one iota of that truce was observed. So what happened was, yes, I agree with you, after 9/11, these guys in Washington made the strategic situation that they should not let that problem continue to fester like that in a rich country like that, and they went in and tried to change it. Okay, that was a strategic decision.
If it was
But don't
Ethiopia,
tell
we
me there
would
was
not
no
have gone.
provocation when the other side didn't observe one commitment they made in the supposed ceasefire. What are you laughing at?
I'm laughing because if it was, you said rich country, and if it was Ethiopia or Uganda, we
Well,
would
that's not a
not
threat.
have even
What
bothered.
are you talking about? They went into Kosovo and they helped that situation. They went into Bosnia. These are not rich
How about
countries.
Rwanda?
Come on, that was a democratic administration
What I'm
anyway.
trying to
wasn't it?
tell you is that if you want to sell us war, you got to sell it to us in a way that
They
we think we
didn't.
are noble.
No, you're just a new leftist from back in the '70s that has been revived, and you're enjoying the fact that you can be as negative as you want about this country.
I'm
And you
also a
give
bit
this
of a
country-
neocon because I think that capitalism holds the promise to be the greatest new tradition on this
Okay.
planet.
I'm sorry I put this over
So
to.
which one am I? Am I the warmonger or am I the peacemonger?
What do you
If
mean
I-
warmonger?
well,
I didn't say you're a warmonger. I said you were new left, ideologue.
No, I
from the
said I'm a
70s.
warmonger because
You're not a
I
warmonger.
believe in capitalism and I believe in the
What's that
neoconservative
got to
efforts.
do with capitalism, warmonger?
Well,
You're just
it's-
all this is slogans.
It all has to do with capitalism. It all has to do with what we're trying to do.
Well, why don't we just resign our culture and not have a free enterprise system? Let's go and get Stalin over here and so on.
That's hardly what I'm.
Well, I'm saying, this is a system that you've been bequeathed.
No, I'm telling you that capitalism is, if you'd listened, I told you that I'm totally on board with capitalism as the probably most positive globalizing force that we have at our disposal as a human species.
We're way off the point in this book. I will say one thing, when you say we had no right to go into Iraq, we didn't go into Iraq when all the things were broken because we were like, it would have taken too big an effort, and we didn't, and we were looked like on as a paper tiger after that. But when we were provoked with this thing, so they took the opportunity to say, look guys, this is what we're going to do to people who don't observe their treaty obligations. And they thought they could deal with it there, and it was a misassessment.
But it looks crappy, guys.
The strategic misassessments
It
always
looks
look
bad,
happen.
man. I mean, you got.
I would love to have you during the Civil War with Lincoln. You'd have been great. You know, he lost battle after battle. Thousands upon thousands, hundreds of thousands of Union soldiers were killed. You'd have been out there saying, oh, misassessment, you know, strategic mistake, all this kind of stuff. You'd have had this guy strung up.
No,
Truman was the most unpopular president we had. He had 29% popularity rating. Everyone thought he was the worst person. Now he's considered one of the best presidents we ever had. So, you know, I don't see Bush is ever going to raise to that. I would agree with you. But the point is that your point here is what the naysayers say in every situation when things are going bad. Oh, things are going bad. You had no right to do this, blah, 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 blah. Look, maybe they shouldn't have done it. But you have to give them the right. You have not the right, the respect to think they did it for motives that were decent.
And if they had respected the American public enough to make us, to at least consider that we have some intellect, and sell it to us in a way that we feel like we're Lincoln marching into Iraq, then we would be all on
Oh, you
board.
think it's wrong to take Saddam, a brutal killer, out if we could do it?
No,
Who was
but I
paying
think it's
terrorists
wrong to make it.
who were paying suicide bombers $45,000 a family in Israel for
No.
everyone that would go and blow themselves up. So
But
you
I-
think that's a bad thing?
No, but-
That's a noble act.
Sure. So let's talk about about 20 wars in Africa going on right now, and let's talk about why we're not being noble and going.
If
into
you
taking
would
care
go
of
into
people.
Africa, they would call you a colonialist. You can't go into
What are we in
Africa.
Iraq?
That's not. You were provoked in Iraq. There was a treaty. signed.
Barely. Come on, man.
Oh, well, okay. We should let Saddam stay there, brutalize people, have his sons doing the kind of things.
Well, it's
that-
happening in Africa. What difference does it make?
Personally, I think we were cowardly not to do it way back in 1990 when Bush 1 did it.
And
So,
we had a much better reason to be there, right?
it's no different. He didn't observe any of the things. He killed all the Kurds,
Mm-hmm.
killed all the Shiites and everything.
I shouldn't say much better reason, but we had a lot more public support for that.
No, because you were on an upswing there, as Shakespeare
Sure.
put it best.
And that's when you really got to do it. You got to get us when happy days are here again. And if you're not able to sell us that, then we're not
I
going
don't
to
want
get
to
on
sell
board.
you anything. I can't sell you anything. There's Shakespeare said, there's a time taken in the affairs of men that when taken at its crest leads on to fortune, and then when you miss that time, leads on to disaster. Unfortunately, in the first Iraq War, we missed the crest. We didn't do what should have been done. I can see you blaming us for that. We treated Iraq like a third-rate country. We didn't want to bring American democracy there. We said, screw you people, kill yourselves, we've saved the oil. Basically, that's all we did. We let them pay us off to send our troops there. That's much more sinful than what Bush Jr. has done. Bush Jr. tried to do something decent and just didn't have the wherewithal or force or insight to do it properly. But I think Bush père was much more guilty than Bush Jr. And having observed the whole thing, and I think I was a mature person through the whole thing, and you were probably still a teenager at that time.
Yeah, I was 18.
So, you know. Anyway, let's come back to medicine. I won't take your point in terms of, I think the endeavor in Iraq is a noble endeavor gone wrong because they didn't pursue it in a determined enough, powerful enough, aggressive enough manner.
Well, they
just
needed a
try to
better
do it on
PR
the
guy.
cheap. What?
Because I would love to think that it was noble.
Well, because it's totally, obviously noble. I mean, if you can't see nobility,
You
you can't
can't-
see nobility in resisting monstrous dictators, then I don't see what you can see.
Well, then go to Africa, and then I'll get on board
What's
with you
Africa
guys.
got to do with it?
People are dying by the tens of thousands.
Oh, well, that's
It's
America's
exactly-
fault, that they're dying by the tens of thousands? Are these people threatening to blow up the World Trade Center?
How about the 45,000 people that starve to death on a daily basis? Why don't we do
Oh, it
something
is
about
a
that?
sinful thing that the UN doesn't go into Darfur, but that's again a fear of Islamic extremism.
Well, are we going to be afraid or are we going to be leaders?
All right.
And if we're going to be leaders, why is it just Iraq?
All right,
Is it
we
'cause
can
it's
convince the
Operation
UN to go into Darfur.
Iraqi liberation?
We've been trying to convince the UN to go into Darfur.
Oh,
And
I'm
everyone
sure.
in this country knows that not going into the Congo was a mistake and that it should have been done. But that doesn't mean that America is the only country that made that mistake. The whole world stood by.
No, but
And the Europeans, what do they ever do? Nothing, 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 nothing.
But-
And they've got more population, they've got almost 1 billion people in Europe, and they're all unified. And who do they give money to, and what do they do? Nothing.
But
So,
what you're
okay.
saying is that it's a noble effort, and I'm saying I would love to think that.
Well, it is
Show
a
me-
noble effort. I don't care what you're saying. It's a noble effort gone wrong. I don't care what all your liberal friends say. It's a noble effort gone wrong. You give these people no decency. You think Bush is just a rotter. You think all those people around him are just rotters. This is really insulting. And this is what goes on, that you guys think that these people are just criminally rotten people. There are people who, he can make mistakes.
Well, let's talk
We're going
about
to say
your own
Lincoln
death.
is a criminally rotten person because he didn't get the Civil War going correctly until 1864? Is Truman a criminally rotten person because he muffed the Korean War thing and let the nukes spread everywhere? What are you talking about? These people, you have to give them some a sense of decency.
I'm talking about this. I'll ask you this. Are George Bush, Caspar Weinberger, Ronald Reagan, and George Shultz all noble because once they were done in Iraq the first time, they hired their own company to go in on a $500 million government
Look,
contract?
the capitalist problem is not my issue. The problem is
Oh,
wait.
I'm asking you if they're noble, not if they're
Is
capitalist.
Schultz, I didn't say noble, I didn't call those people noble. I'm talking
Okay.
about Bush
You're talking
Jr.
about Bush Jr.
I'm
He's not
sorry to
connected.
say, I do think Caspar Weinberger is a scheming person. I do think George Bush Sr. is greatly lacking. I do think, in fact, but I do think Schultz was a fairly noble person. He
just
was
made
a
a
Marine
lot of
Corps
money
veteran.
after
He's a Marine Corps veteran who saw service in World War II, and he had a lot of decency about him. Who was the fourth person that you mentioned?
Schultz, Weinberger, Reagan, and Bush.
I can't speak for Reagan, he's a movie actor, I don't know what he represented, whether he was good or bad. He was an actor, so it's impossible for me to speak, but Schultz I wouldn't call a schemer, and I think the people around Bush are really motivated by trying to protect you, even though they're doing perhaps not the best job possible.
And all I'm saying is that most of us see them as
And
war
I don't
profiteers.
care what most of you see them as.
I know you
may
don't
be
care,
wrong.
and that's
You
why
may
none
be
of us
wrong.
support you guys,
I don't
man.
care. Well, the point is, you don't represent the heartland of this country, fortunately.
I'm
Because
sorry.
I don't think the heartland of the country sees these people.
I don't think they
you
think
see
that
them.
much.
Most of us see them. What'd you say, most of us see
I
them?
don't think that.
Most of us see them as what in this country? What'd you say we see
I said
them?
I don't think the
No,
heartland.
what did you say we see them as, most
War
of us?
profiteers. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I quit at that point. There are some who would be conceived of, but I don't think you can speak of, I'm not a great admirer of Condoleezza Rice. I think she's an innocent person, though. I don't think she's necessarily a great, strategist. I don't think, what's his name, the guy, Cheney and these guys, you may consider them war profiteers, but I think they are patriotic people. Whether you
I think
like
they
them or
think
not,
they
their
are.
strategies are misguided, and so on. So, I mean, to insult them and call them all these horrible names, that's just like what the communists used to do. That's
I
just
think they
communist
think they're
propaganda.
patriotic, and I'm happy to sit down and tea with them and talk about them about their talk
Well,
about their
no, I think they're
patriotism.
trying to be patriotic, and maybe they're misguided patriots. But
And very greedy.
a person like Clinton, who we all admired because he was so intelligent and we thought he was doing such a great job. At the time, people were very happy with his presidency.
He was limp on
We
the wall.
find out that he was, missing a lot of important things because of personal considerations, and he wasn't as patriotic as one would have wanted him to be.
I agree with that.
So, these things only come out in retrospect. So I would not impugn, I wouldn't impugn these other guys who are making mistakes. I grant you they're making mistakes, but I'm not sure they're unpatriotic and
so
not trying to do the best they can.
Or they didn't think.
Okay, they stole an election, I'll give you that one. Okay.
Two, actually, if you count them four.
I don't think the second one was stolen, but.
There's a
maybe.
lot about Ohio that's really
Oh,
ugly.
Ohio, okay, that could be, but the popular vote was pretty resounding, and I think Kerry was probably not a very effective candidate, so I don't think that we can say that they stole that one so obviously as.
Not so obviously, sure. But they weren't trying,
All right.
fell off a truck and were.
All right, so now then, back to the original point, the rights situation. He says, can contracts and agreements produce perfect rights as well as compulsory duties unless imperfect rights and duties of contract have previously existed? I don't know what he's saying there.
I don't either.
Is your translation better on that than mine?
I have no idea.
Where are you? I read one and two.
A and B there, it's in chapter 2. Well, let's go on here, see if we can get it. So now, he goes on about the Mosaic religion. Let me now proceed to a far more important objection which has been raised against my position. I don't know if you can find that. Without refuting my arguments, people claim that my views contradict the sacred authority of the Mosaic religion. And so now he is going on to speak that the laws of Moses, I think he's going to say here at some point, what page is this now, the laws of Moses? Hey, okay, so we finally, the Mosaic religion, what is it, if not a system of religious government, of religious power and rights? So he's going on to try to decide whether the laws of Moses are abusive in some way, I think is what he's trying to say. And he quotes several people here, which we don't really have time to go into all of that. So, finally, he concludes on that particular presentation, the objection goes right to my heart and troubles me deeply. I must confess that this view of Judaism, except for some careless formulation, is shared by many of my co-religionists, but I am convinced it is not true. What is the view of religion that he's talking about? If such an obvious contradiction existed between the Word of God and my reason, if this actually existed, I would be able to silence, I would probably be able to silence my reason. So he says, if there was a contradiction between the Mosaic religion and my reason, I would probably, in the end, because of my loyalty to my culture and people, be able to silence my reason. So finally, he gives you an important quote. What is the quote here saying here that I missed here, that the objection to the Mosaic religion that is in these quotes? Can you summarize it, any of you? Because I don't want to read the whole thing to find it out here. No, okay, you can't. I think one of the quotes, though, here, talking about the arm of the church being so powerful, the implementation of this curse from Deuteronomy, he's talking about, was put in the hands of the highest servants of the church. Clearly, ecclesiastical law armed with coercive power has always been one of the cornerstones of the Jewish religion and a principal article of the religious system of your fathers. So I thought that was the objection. Someone is saying, how can you then, dear Mr. Mendelssohn, continue to adhere to a coercive faith, is what he's saying, that your faith was always blessing and curse, coercive. And he's saying, well, if it was really that way, I don't really think it is, but if it was really that way, I'd probably be able to silence my reason. You think he's going to say the opposite thing. But the interesting thing is that in Mendelssohn, the very delicate balance between respect for the religion and reason position was still operating. It was held in check. By the next generation and the one after that, it just broke completely. And I'm not saying that's bad or good, I'm just stating a fact. So therefore, all his children and grandchildren converted to Christianity. So that delicate balance between loyalty and so on for the religion of the fathers, etc., was totally broken. Here you're getting him showing that delicate balance here. He says, I could silence my reason if I had to. So if I thought that if it was true that Judaism was coercive, like you're saying, I probably still wouldn't abandon it, is probably what he's saying. Yeah?
On that quote you mentioned, but work through the Word of God, and that's like contradicting my reason, the most I can do is be imposed silence on my reason. when it goes on, it mentions.
No, that isn't the quote, that's him. The quote is what,
Right.
yeah, he quotes someone previously.
Yeah, I'm just quoting those.
Okay, quoting this.
But when it goes on, it says that unrefuted argument would appear in the most secret recesses of my heart, be transformed into disquieting doubts. Those doubts themselves would resolve themselves into childlike prayers, into fervent supplications for illumination. So I think he's trying to say that, yeah, I can take some things on faith that, like if God's will contradicted what I know to be reasonable, I can say, okay, I'll take your word, God. But it doesn't mean that the reason's still there. The reason's still saying, well, there is a reason, but I'm asking for guidance because, frankly, I don't get it.
Yeah, I say that delicate balance is there. He is still faithful to the, he was going to doubt, he's going to fervently pray and things, but he's still a Jew. He's trying to be a reasonable one, put it that way. And so I think that's what you're saying. The next, I got to move along because we want to finish this tonight if we can, so we can move on to some other things next time. Next page or two, he says something like, Christianity, as you know, is built upon Judaism and would therefore collapse along with it. I'm not sure if that's true, and these are all statements that need a lot of proof. He says further along, a couple of pages further along, I've never publicly contested the Christian religion, and I shall never enter into a dispute with its true adherents. And I do not agree that the Jews possess secret information in unknown documents like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion or whatever, which throw a different light on historical facts. He said, well, we do now have the scrolls which weren't known there, but anyway, he says people thought they were harboring secret. There's no secret documents. Finally, he gets to another big point here. I don't know if we can get the right page. He's arguing with a guy named Mr. Marshall. I guess Marshall was the one who he was quoting back here or something earlier. Nevertheless, I must do justice to his penetrating insight. That is Marshall's. When he saw what he saw was, at least in part, not wrong. It is true that I recognize no eternal verities. Do you see where we are? No eternal truths except those which can not only be comprehended by the human intellect, but can also be demonstrated and verified by man's reason. So he's saying, there is a contradiction here. I do not recognize eternal truths except those that can be verified by intellect and reason. However, it's a misconception of Judaism if Marshall thinks I cannot adopt the position I'm taking without deviating from the religion of my fathers. And Marshall saying, look, your religion is totally unreasonable anyway, stop the baloney, convert to Christianity, or, stop making believe that, you don't have a problem here. Contradiction between reason and faith, basically. On the contrary, I consider this view an essential aspect of the Jewish religion, that is, using one's reason. And he may be stretching things here. And I believe that this teaching represents, but we're talking about his view, not ours. We want to learn his view. That's the whole point of this. I consider this view an essential part of the Jewish religion, that it's reasonable, he says. And believe this teaching represents one of its characteristics. Here he is being a little unkind to Christianity. He's trying to say Judaism is more reasonable than Christianity. You'll have to debate that. I don't want to get into that thing, but he's basically saying that. To sum up in one sentence, I believe Judaism knows nothing of a revealed religion in the sense in which Christians define the term. This is really, now he's getting into some important thing. Jews, Israelites, possess a divine or supernatural legislation, if you want to call it that. And this is how he puts it. Judaism is just a legislation, like a constitution. It's nothing more than that. Laws, commandments, statutes, rules of conduct, instruction in God's will and in what they are to do to attain temporal and eternal salvation. Moses, in a miraculous and supernatural way, revealed to them these laws and commandments, but not the dogmas, propositions concerning salvation, or self-evident reason. So Moses just gave them the laws and the commandments, but not supernatural theological principles concerning salvation. These the Lord reveals to us, and all men, at all times, through nature, but not through the spoken and the written word. Now that's really a very pithy, I don't know if you guys got a book in front of you, but that's pretty pithy, don't you think, in terms of his arguments. I don't necessarily agree with him, but in terms of his arguments, he's saying, Judaism, that's what would be his argument. Look, we're harmless, you folks. Judaism is just a system of laws. We don't have a revealed theology. And to some extent that is true. Islam is the same. Although Islam is much more Jewish than it is Christian. I've always said Islam is cosmopolitan Judaism. Judaism taken beyond the borders of one nation. But on the other hand, there is a theology in Islam too, to some extent. I'm afraid many, as you say, people say you have 2 or 3 Jews in a room and they won't even agree on any point between them, and there's some truth to that. I'm afraid many readers will once again find my view shocking. People have usually paid little attention to this distinction. Supernatural legislation, that means revealed, divine, not natural, not reasonable, has been mistaken for supernatural revelation. That's a really interesting little, these are very, how should we put it, dialectical, sort of rhetorical attempts to argue in a polemical way for his position of religion. People have spoken of Judaism as if it were merely an earlier revelation of these religious doctrines and tenets which are necessary for all of man's salvation. So I've got to be more specific here. Those principles which are independent of time and remain forever unchanged are eternal truths. They are either necessary, getting very reasonable if we can call that, as such unchangeable or contingent. In other words, they are necessary truths, true in and of themselves, or they're dependent, contingent on something else in a logical way. That is, either they are permanent, he's getting very Aristotelian here. They are permanently grounded in their essence, blah, 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 blah. In other words, necessary as well as contingent truths have common source. The former originate in reason. The necessary ones are the reasonable ones. The latter, the will of God. So the contingent ones, he says, are the will of God. It's really difficult here. Necessary truths cannot be changed even by God himself. Einstein's physics can't be changed by God. That's a necessary truth. Even he, notwithstanding his omnipotence, cannot suspend the rules. His unchangeable reason. Contingent truths, however, are subject to the will of God. They are changeable in time and place. They are temporal, historical truths. Events which occurred once and may never occur again. The birth of Jesus, the revelation of Moses, he's talking about, are principles which by the process of cause and effect become accepted as truths at a certain point in time and space. They can be considered true only in relation to that particular point in time and space. All historical truths, he said, fall into that category. Necessary truths are based on reason, upon unchangeable logical relationship. And so he goes on like that. The appreciation or the apperception of truth in the second category requires not only reason but observation. I don't know what the second category is here. Do you know what the second category is, the second kind of truth? I guess it's contingent truth again. We have to observe, I guess that is scientific truth. Then he says that basically a third category, moving along, is historical truth. The passages, so to speak, which occur only once in the book of nature. He's losing me again. But I understand what necessary truths are. I'm not sure I understand what his contingent truths are, and I don't understand how they differ from historical truths. Can you enlighten me there, maybe? Okay, you don't have to. All you got to do is be able to describe Mendelssohn's thought in an essence. So you got to take some notes and note cards and so on, and see if you can get through this. Further along, and then I'll take a quick break here to see if are we going to get through this. Yeah, I think I can get through this. I think I can get through this. Yeah, I think I can. So historical truths. What page is that? Historical truths. The passages, so to speak, which occur only once in the book of nature must however be explained, or they will remain incomprehensible. Further along, whenever God intends man to understand a certain truth, his wisdom provides man with the means most suited to that purpose. If it's a necessary truth, God provides man with whatever degree of reason he needs to understand it. If it is a natural law, it's to be disclosed to man. God's wisdom will provide him with the necessary capacity for observation. And if it's historical truth, it's to be preserved for posterity. Okay, so those are the three kinds, that's what he's talking about. A necessary truth is, God, I think therefore I exist, or something like that, I guess, I don't know. A natural law has to be observed, like he's talking about scientific truths. So the second thing is scientific truth. The first thing is truth that your reason can perceive in and of itself. And the third thing are historical truths. That's what it is. So one, I can put it on the board here, but I don't know, it would help.
For the temporal truths, that's not,
Temporal truth is historical truth. Temporal truth. So basically, he's got three kinds of truth, not two. The second two seem to be contingent to me. But the one is necessary, which is something you can discover by reason alone. Two, you need observation or scientific truth, I think he's saying. So you need scientific observation. I guess these are mathematically, more mathematical, like I said, and three are historical. They only have to do with time and place. They're conserved by tradition, but they may not be, they may not be immutable. They can be perhaps changed. So you were getting into the meat of his essay in the second part, wouldn't you say? The first part really was just lightweight, but now we're getting here.
And what page are you on, please?
Well, tell them what page.
91.
91. So it seems to me that only with regard to historical truth did God in His supreme wisdom have to instruct mankind either by human means, through the spoken or written word, or through extraordinary events and miracles. He believes in miracles. But the eternal truths that are necessary for man's salvation and happiness are taught by God in a manner that is more fitting to His dignity. I don't know what he means, but I think he means reason. Yeah.
For the first and second one, I guess what I'm getting from Mendelssohn is that those things are unchanging, those things just...
Yeah, I think immutable. I think they're immutable
They're
for as far
immutable.
as he's concerned.
Yet, especially with the second one, we have scientific theories of how the universe works, only to have them thrown into chaos.
Well, he's saying those are discovered by observation. The observation was not well done,
So there's no real way of knowing that our
that's the second kind of truth.
Are real truth.
Well, that's the second kind of truth is has to be done through observation, and it may have to be changed. The third one is certainly changeable as historical truth. The first one he thinks is immutable, obviously. The first one. And he thinks those are discoverable by reason alone, I think he does. And he thinks there's nothing in Judaism that would be not in accord with reason. God was good enough to disclose to man those truths in which their happiness depends. He was neither omnipotent nor good enough to grant them the capacity to discover those truths themselves. So, you have to have revelation. This is very medieval. This is the kind of thing Maimonides says, the kind of things the Arab philosophers say. I'm going to skip along here. To return now, about 3 or 4 pages along, to my previous remarks, Judaism does not claim to possess the exclusive revelation of eternal truths that are indispensable to salvation. Now, I don't know if you can find that paragraph, but he did say that. He did say that Judaism does not, it's only what? It's not a revealed salvation religion. Christianity is a revealed salvation religion, he's implying, but Judaism is only revealed legislation, is what he's saying. And therefore it doesn't, the eternal truths have to do with reason. So it's very clever here. I'm going to stop there a minute because I want to change this this thing I got in here. Just give me a minute. And you guys can take a bit of a stretch.